So I've always written about the things which are on my mind, and that's not a deliberate process often. I will just write whatever makes me laugh. The fact of I better do another show next year because I love doing shows and I want to do them and they're good for business, comedy business. Um, you go, I've got to write something. And then you look at the notes you've been making throughout the year and you write, they're all sort of weird, disparate stuff. Peppa Pig, question mark, stuff like that, nonsense. And then you end up going on stage. I end up going on stage and talking about them. And inescapably, the thing I'm worried about in the background comes out. So it wasn't a decision to write about the climate. It was just the thing I ended up writing about. I did a show in 2022 in Edinburgh, which was a sort of work in progress. Here's all the stuff in my head kind of a show. And at the beginning of that month, I was doing about 6 minutes on being scared of the climate crisis. And at the end of that month, I was doing mostly half an hour on it. Not all of it worked, but I was trying to do half an hour of the hour about the climate. And I was thinking, I think next year's show's about the climate. So I sort of discovered it. The way I see it now is the novelty of comedy was starting to wane. The difference from one night to another was starting to wane. But now doing stand-up about the climate, God, it's always difficult. So that's a novelty. It's difficult in a new way. Oh, I've discovered a whole new way I can die on my ass. It's a really invigorating challenge. And the benefits when I have a good gig doing climate, a inverted commas good gig, people come up and thank me in a different sort of a way. And that's still novel. Do you know what I mean? That's interesting. Yeah. I feel like I've done something useful for me, and I've maybe done something useful for them, and I've maybe done something useful, Tom, for the planet. And I don't know if you're writing this, you'll need to really put that in Comic Sans so people know how I pronounced it.
One of the challenges, which you kind of alluded to earlier, is in order to tell a joke, you often have to set people up education-wise on a concept.
Yes.
That must be so tricky to do, to know that before you can get to the punchline, you have to kind of get people up to speed. Yeah.
So you are existing in a sort of a realm of ambiguity where you have to lead them by the hand. And I suppose the sort of comedy that I want to do, every so often you'll see someone who's like the maths comedian. And if you're not a mathematician, you can only understand 20% of the show. And I don't want to be like that for climate. But the challenge is for me, I need to know so much about it. I can decide which bits will have the most kind of immediate or most relatable or most mass media appeal. Not that I'm a huge mass media famous comic, not at all. But I want to be able to do club comedy. I wrote Spoilers, the last show. I wrote that in clubs on Friday nights in front of people who did not want to hear about the climate. And as a result, the show is robust as potential merch idea, robust as t-shirts, because it had to be. And now if I do that show to people who understand about sustainability, God, it soars because the stuff's club funny. And that will need to happen with Climate Show 2, as I'm excitingly calling it at the moment. I'm building
Climate Show 2, robust as
yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. But I'm not going to go and face plant into tough comedy club gigs on a Friday night. Because will those places even book me if I go back and stink the place out again a third time with my climate waffle? But also because that necessarily has made the show a little more blunt of a blunt instrument than I would like. I think you can be robust and also have finesse. So I hope what I'm learning now with the creation of the newer stuff is that I've learned how to be silly about it. I've learned how to be myself about it. And I've learned how to not accidentally vibrate with fear whilst describing something awful in a way that isn't funny and doesn't turn people on, so like comedy wise.
But I guess the interesting thing in that respect is how much you worry about just preaching to the converted.
There is a value to preaching to the choir. People preach to choirs. Preaching is a thing and choirs are a thing. I don't think preachers go out, oh, there might be something in this, Tom. You might have to send me the transcript. I don't think preachers go out and say, I've got some stuff to tell you about the good word of the Lord or whatever their thing is. Can the choir stop listening now? Because I know you've heard this. People do preach the choir. So that has a value. But also, I think that there's the choir and there's the choir. I'm preaching to the agnostic. Oh, show title. I'm preaching agnostic because I'm agnostic. I'm saying guys, surely we need to think about this a bit more, and surely we need to put this in our lives. Also, there's an element to which I am preaching to the sustainability departments of big organizations. My mission statement has become get the right joke about the right subject in front of the right person who's
Yes.
making a budgetary decision and get them to make the right decision. So that's part of it for me. I'm not, and that is born of recognizing I'm not famous. I don't have reach. I can't contact 1 million followers on something and say, guys, we're all doing this now. But there's the choir and there's the choir. There are people who are I see very pro climate people in the audience more and more now. I see nice elderly couples in North Face. I see crusty Trustafarian types, and they're all super welcome. What I'm really going for is the sort of wave. I don't see any deniers, and there's only 10% of people are deniers. It's pointless. We think there's loads of them because of social media. That'll get worse now thanks to Trump. But I've made a policy decision. I'm not engaging with deniers. It's not my role. I'm not an arguing. I'm not Nish. I don't want to argue with people. I don't know. I don't think that Nish wants to argue with people, but his persona is such that he batters and fights. My
Yes.
persona is like, I'm a nice guy and you trust me. And how can I wield that in the most useful way? Well, I can probably make people who are a bit on the fence a bit less on the fence. And maybe that's pathetic, but maybe that's the best I can do. My part of the mission is meet everyone where they are and bump them one stage further along. Just
Mhm.
contribute, be one little vote in the direction of them thinking, well, maybe I will get an electric car. Maybe I will. Maybe it doesn't seem so mad actually to go to never buy another plastic water bottle again, but always have my water bottle with me. Just little, and those things aren't going to save the world, but maybe if we all start moving slightly more in the right direction, then that will be a good thing.
What would then your piece of advice be to anyone else who is a creative who wants to make art about the climate crisis in a way that, actually gets through to people, as indeed you're hoping to, and we all are really, if we're doing this sort of stuff?
Yes, good question. My advice would be to not be scared to confront it. My advice to anyone, the point of the show is don't be scared to find out more about the climate crisis. It's so frightening and it can be so frightening, and you can feel really isolated and you can feel completely loopy because people aren't talking about it. You read something terrifying and you look out the window, there's nothing there, and you go, "Oh, is this am I losing my mind?" But don't be scared to find out more of it. And certainly, if you're an artist, even if you think that, well, this I don't know enough about this, well, find out about it. If you're interested, find out more about it, because I think that everything contributes. Everything, every plastic cup you don't use helps in some infinitesimal way. Everything ripples. What was the guy's name? He wrote a book about death, and he talked about one way of coping with the idea that we'll die is to think of all the ways in which one's own life has rippled and had effect on all the other lives. And I think that's true of art. So every little helps. You know what I mean? Like every little tiny thing helps. Great quote. Oh, two great quotes. One I can't attribute, and if anyone reading your work or watching this is able to let me know who said this, I'll Google it. Can't work out who said it. The question is, what do we do about the climate crisis? The answer is everything. We do everything. We have to do absolutely everything across all science and craft and art and everything. Everything has to be about the climate. And the other quote, which I can attribute, is Dr. Sandra Steingraber, an American climate activist and a doctor of what I can't remember, but she's a doctor. She said, "It's up to us all now," and this is lovely and artistically tilted. "It's up to us all now to play the Save the World Symphony." She says, "You do not have to play a solo, but you are required to work out what instrument you play and play it to the best of your ability." And I think that I draw enormous comfort from that when I think about what are my responsibilities? What are my obligations? We have an obligation to hope. You and I can sit here as white men in the developed world, and we can worry about the climate crisis because we're not knee deep in water right now. And a lot of people are. Yes, I think we have an obligation to hope, and that obligation can be overwhelming. And you think, what can I do? And it's very easy to think, well, if I can't think of anything to do and it shuts me down to think about it, then I'll just give up and I'll think about something else. But actually, that idea that what you have to do is work out what instrument you're playing and play it to the best of your ability. Obviously, all I've got is a kazoo, but I'm really going for it.
No, it's really interesting you say that because obviously I've been starting work on this series and then the big news event of last week happened
Mm.
and I was just filled with a complete absence of hope immediately,
Yes.
when I
Yes.
woke up to that news. I was like, well, I'm doing this series, but does it matter? Because the most powerful economy in the world has just
Yeah.
elected someone whose views on the climate change appropriately enough with the weather.
Yes. Yes.
And like what sometimes he's outright saying it's a hoax, sometimes he's saying it's
Yes.
really important and we need to do
What I
something, but
will
you never
say,
know.
what I will say to you is that capital knows it's real. Money knows it's real. Business knows it's real. And there are a load of old white dinosaurs at the top of the tree at the moment across all businesses, some of whom know it's real, some of whom don't really care and are just waiting to die. And they will die. They'll move on. They'll cycle out. And the people waiting to get there behind them are extraordinarily impressive and focused. Capital knows it's real. If you work in the insurance industry and you're dealing with risk, all of your actuaries are like, we can't pretend this isn't real. Anyone who wants to sell anything to people, anyone who wants to sell anything to people, there need to be people around for you to sell them to. So I would say that no matter how appalling the news coming out of America is, and I mean that's a bigger subject that we can get time that we've got time for, but the thing that I try to remember there is that people who want to make money, which is people, um, will not let an a climate denying administration tank their chances of making money in future. They have children, they may have grandchildren. They want there to be a world for those people to exist in. In times of struggle and in times of oppression and oppressive regimes, people become more creative and they fight harder and their lives are more meaningful. So let's not be too depressed, no matter how awful it is.